This is Fall 1 data population. I am Nathaniel Holmes, trainer at CSIS, and presenting today with me will be Kyron Pagulayan. He's also a trainer at CSIS. Marshall kind of commands the ship, cracks jokes in the background, and Slyman is also here hiding. He's waiting in the wings to provide support, which is what Marshall should be doing, but instead he harasses me. So with all that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we do, though, we just want to emphasize this version of the Fall 1 data population is specific to batch file population. The first rendition of this training that we did this year was targeted or focused on online maintenance. But since most of you all do batch, we wanted to also do a batch version. So if this is a refresher for you, this is a great training. Because this is probably how you're going to submit most of your data, how you interact with CalPADS most frequently. If you're new, I also encourage you to sign up for the online portion. The online gives us the ability to go field by field, talk about key fields and their importance. And Kyron will show later where to find more detailed resources in terms of a presentation or a recording. So if you're wondering if you signed up and want to know the difference between the two trainings, it's just caters to the two different types of functionality in which data could be submitted to CalPADS. And so something we started at end of year is a change of direction in how we present and author our training. We want to develop skills, right? We want to build the resiliency amongst you all out there in the field because CalPADS constantly change and timelines get shorter and shorter. In addition to those two factors, which we know are true, CalPADS grows. The data, the amount of data, the different state departments and governmental agencies that access CalPADS data has grown as well. And therefore, we can't say, do this, do that, do this. It used to be Fall 1 was 3 files and that was it. It's doubled. It's now 6. They come from 2 different sources. So we feel it's it's a better use of our time to target skills and increase your ability to be self-sufficient. And so this particular training will help you gather and maintain data and help either stress the importance of critical thinking or, create methodologies that go along those lines. And so some of the things that will support, gather, and maintain data that we will demonstrate or talk about, is the importance or where to identify the source data and what systems they come from, how that you would map your data from your SIS to CalPADS. We'll demonstrate how to extract imperfect data and find ways to correct this. And then we'll talk about the importance of documenting local practices, how you might go about establishing some of those for yourself. And, we want you to wonder or consider, what are your local procedures? Is there any that you can add or develop to assist in your reporting and collection, right? And then for critical thinking, this is really, I think, what separates those who can be successful submission in and year in CalPADS is you have to be able to interpret business rules, your data ecosystems, and your LEA standards and apply them to CalPADS. And then CalPADS is going to give you hurdles. You have to be able to review the data, look for completeness and reasonability. Sometimes it's a known issue affecting your data. You have to be able to recognize, I know what came out of my system. I know what's presented in CalPADS. It doesn't make sense. You have to solve simple problems like, an error message which pop up in CalPADS, and maybe the error list isn't descriptive enough to help you solve it. What other documents can you go to find out what's required or what's specified for that particular field that might trigger an error? And then, those who have done this for a long time, those that are forward thinkers, can conceptualize the impact of changes. And so that's, as you're submitting data, as the requirements change for the data submitted, like how the LIP program was changed a couple of years ago, you can see, I need to get this data from this person They need to be aware of this change. They need to be populating the student information system. It affects this group of students, which I haven't seen addressed yet. I need to submit a support ticket. So all of those things go into data population, but primarily the two skills, or the skills that we want to emphasize, are the ability to gather and maintain the data locally, and then being able to critical think your way through the submission process. So we have highlighted Fall 1 data population, and this is the live version, right? Again, it's a batch file, so it's half of the live version. They're going to be supported by self-paced video. So we're cramming a lot in 2 hours. If you want more detailed information, please watch the self-paced training. Following this training, you should be able to submit your data from your student information systems into CalPads, and you will be primed for the Fall 1 reporting certification, or Fall 1 advanced if you are an experienced user. And so we have objectives, right? There's goals for every training. And our goal for this training is to help you identify the different file types expected for Fall 1, be able to determine which fields in your local systems map to which CalPads fields using the file specifications. All that should assist you to be able to perform the submission process. It says through online maintenance or batch, but again, we're focusing on the batch file submission. And along the way, you're going to need the ability to be able to resolve submission errors and overcome roadblocks, right? So you can get to looking at reports and certifying later on once the snapshots start. And so I'm going to let Kyron take over and kind of preview some of the documents that we will help bring out as we're troubleshooting and referring to resources.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Fall 1 data population. I'll just be presenting to you some of the usual toolkits you should have handy to be able to survive Fall 1 submission, and also all other submissions in CalPads. So first and foremost is, of course, let's start with the CalPads user manual, which you could access through either when logged into CalPads by going into Help and then clicking on user manual. Is my screen big enough for you guys to see? Just checking. So if you click on this, it brings up the CalPads user manual, and the user manual is a good place, is a good resource, because we try to consolidate everything that is relevant to different submissions, especially this Fall 1 roadmap. If I click on the Fall 1 roadmap, it provides us, some generalized information on what to expect for your Fall 1 submission. Unfortunately, we don't have the submission checklist handy yet, but it's in the works. It should be available soon. It gives you the milestones. We also have the annual back to school letter. We have the PEBT guidance, the independent study, all of the links that we might think might be essential for Fall 1 submission is here. We even have the Flash 212 for those trainings and regional meetings you could register. All of this are here. And then, of course, just a summary of what to expect. And for the LCFF inclusion, the dates that will be included on the cutoff. So this is just some of the toolkits you could have. We also have file templates. And since this is a batch file related data population training, you could also reference the batch file submissions. So in the actual user manual homepage, you have here how to submit files and how to view submitted files. So the upload of files, the file upload contains the processing methods that each file entails and all of the operational keys. So sometimes maybe this is not relevant to Fall 1, but if you have all of those replacement type files in different submissions, this is where you could see if a record is being replaced or not. And then you also have the process of batch file submissions and the different submissions. So I'm just showing you this, especially for those new to CalPads and trusted the CalPads responsibility this year. And then also you have here your batch file templates. So if you click on batch file templates from the website, you could bring you here. And these are the modified templates for this year. You have your current ones, but since we've already switched codes as of today, this will be your batch file templates. If your SIS hasn't been updated yet, I encourage you to update your SIS. If they don't have the codes yet or the ability to generate the exact formats, you could download this. And if you have a way to be able to include all of those mailing address columns information, then you could do so. So that's for the user manual. And then the next one is the CD homepage for CalPad. So you have here the same thing that you get from the user manual. You have your the calendar, the communications page for all of your flash and letters from the superintendent. You have FAQs for fall 1, fall, and different submissions. And I would also encourage you, if you're new to CalPads, to subscribe to the CalPads listserv. This is a one-way listserv, and basically this, if you want to be updated with what's happening to CalPads, I recommend you subscribe to this, okay? And what else is in here? And then, of course, you have your system documentation. So the most recent versions of the different files that you could refer to that Nate hinted on can be downloaded here, aside from the user manual. And then the next one is the CSIS website. The CSIS website is where you could download the PowerPoints, especially for today's PowerPoint. You could download it here. Just go to csis.fcmat.org/resources, and it should bring up the list of downloadable PowerPoints. And then also, aside from that, the CSIS website provides you access to Bridge. Now, if you're new to CalPads, if you've recently changed, if you've replaced a person as the LA admin and you want to get trained, obviously you wouldn't be here if you have this. But if there's someone who needs to have access, then they could go to the CSIS website, go to go to Learning, LMS, and then request an LMS account. Is a pop-up showing? I'm not sure. Yeah, so just click on request an LMS account and then that should then create a service ticket that you would have for that CSIS could create for you for your account. So that's that. And then of course you have our CSIS YouTube channel, which provides you the different videos that we've curated for fall 1. So we have here your fall 1 data population training. So if we go to the actual homepage, let's go back here. It gives you the different Q&As, the most recent Q&As, recorded Q&As. It also gives you some different video tutorials on how to review reports, look at validation errors, look at certification errors. It also gives you intro to the actual basic CalPads functionality. And then here is a curated version of the self-paced training. So our training today is just a way to mesh together the different recordings and be able to have a generalized idea on how the entire system works. But if you want to have to get information on the requirements for each field within a file type, I would recommend you watch these videos and supplement that with the different CFS documents that is available here. Yes, that's it. And we move on to, what's the next slide, Nate? Our agenda, right?
That's great.
So Nate did the overview, and we're not doing online maintenance today since this is obviously a batch file demo heavy process. And so after that, we'll do the batch file demo for each of those 4 files. Unfortunately, we can't demo SPED and SSRV, because that comes from from your special education system. Okay, and so for fall 1, this is where we normally establish the student's profile that will be used by CalPAS for the entire year. So you have here, just your SCNR, SINF, SELA, SPRG, SPED, SSRV, and that's it. So these are the 6 files that we expect you to be uploading to CalPAS. The first 4 will come from your SIS, and the last 2 will come from your special education system. Your SPED person will just be creating transaction files or records in let's say SACE or Cyrus, and we'll be pushing that to CalPAS. Okay, so and then of course once you've established this, we down through as we continue on through the submission periods throughout the year, there will be different supporting file types that would cater to different requirements in CalPAS for those submissions. Okay, but our focus today is this SCNR, SINF, SELA, SPRG, SPED, and SSRV. Do you have anything to add on that, Nate? No? Okay, moving on. Moving on. Okay, so here is what comprises your student profile for fall 1. You have your SCNR, and this basically gives you ownership of a student. So this is the first file you should submit, and make sure that you've submitted it, posted it before submitting the succeeding files, because the SCNR is what gives you ownership to a student. So if you have a student who transferred from a different district as part of your file, then by enrolling that student, by submitting the file, the record within this SCNR file, you then gain ownership to be able to report all succeeding or all relevant supporting documents. So the SCNR file as well would help you generate SSIDs for new students within California. Okay, so the SINF would contain your demographic information, the student address, which is essential for direct certification, PEBT, and then you have SELA, which is essential for determining if a student requires a English learner services or requires services for EL, or if a student has reclassified as fluent, and then your SPRG, which provides all of those relevant eligibilities that your students need have, which is your NSLP, your free lunch, your migrant ed, your tribal foster youth, your LIP programs, which is associated with your SELA, with your EL students, and then of course you have here your SPED and SSRV, which identifies students as special education, and it also provides the services that they're being receiving. Okay, so part of the student profile, which is fall 1, is, as I mentioned, used as your base information that would be relevant to all other information throughout the year. So you have your student enrollments, and then in fall 2, you then add those course enrollments that the students are attending in the classes, and then if those classes are providing the EL services that your EL students are receiving, and then fall 2 would also include post-secondary file, which basically identifies those graduates and exits last year who are now probably in colleges or in the industry that was relevant to their CTE courses. And then you have end of year 1 for course completions and to identify your CT completers. At the end of the year, you have your EOI2 program participation. This is the other half of your SPRG file that will be collected at the end of the year. And then you have your discipline, EOI3, which collects your student discipline, your absence, your student absence summary. And then of course you have your end of year 4, which is the second second collection of your student with disability information. So since throughout the year, there might be students with disability who may have changed or who requires amendments through their services and through their eligibility. So those are collected throughout the year. But then of course, part of this, all of this won't be relevant unless you've established a correct, accurate representation of your student profile data. And then of course we have our data cycle. So this is just for our newbies who are still grasping the relevance of CalPADS. So this is our data cycle. As you can see, you have your SIS. Your SIS is where you maintain your student data locally. It is important every start of the academic year that you update your SIS to be able to ensure that you have the correct formats, correct codes that prepares you for this new academic year of submission. Okay, so your SIS will have all of those. So initially, you would then extract your SCNR file, and it would contain your student information. Anyone who in that file, a student might have already an SSID, and you're just re-enrolling the student to CalPADS. But then there are some who require an SSID, so that is then also requested in CalPADS. So that file then goes to CalPADS, and CalPADS then tries to generate validations and also generate matches, possible matches of students that may already have SSIDs. And so once you have that information, you can then request the information back and send it back to your SIS, which then your SIS will then generate all of the other supporting files, which is your SINF, your SELA, your SPRG. So once all of those files are exported to CalPADS, uploaded to CalPADS, and posted, CalPADS will then use those information to identify if a student is special ed or if a student requires initial LPAC testing, or if a student qualifies for direct certification, and also if a student is basically a foster youth. So CalPADS will use those first 4 files to be able to establish the relevant association to the different other external databases. So for, let's say for SELA, if a student is TBD, then CalPADS will push that information together with your enrollment, ownership, and your SINF to TOMS to be able to allow the student to test for LPAC testing. And then that also goes the same in the middle of the year when an EL student is tested for summative testing. Now, for state matching, you have your foster youth and direct certification matching throughout the year. Now, you have here your special education system, which I hinted earlier. So if a student is determined as special ed or student with disability, you are required to update or submit the SPED transaction. So you have your SPED record and SSRV records automatically posted through CalPADS with the help of your SPED person. And how frequent should data be maintained? As much as we want you to have to be able to maintain it frequently, I mean, the end goal is just to be able for you to have accurate data. So regardless of how often you do it. As long as your data is relevant when it's needed, then that's how we want it, we want to update. But if you are focused into CalPAD submission alone and you don't have any other hats to wear, then once a week we do it, or once every 2 weeks, or even once a month. But right now, since this is the start of the year, we would I hope we all agree that it should be as soon as the data is available. Okay, and the reason why we want accurate data to be available or posted as soon as you have the information is because of the different factors like local enrollment procedures. So I mean, in terms of considering when to submit the data, so you have to consider your local enrollment procedures. When does school start? When do you shift from exiting all enrollments, closing on all the books for the academic year from? And also how many people are involved with CalPADS collection. So these are your local enrollment procedures and responsibilities. Do you have a SELA person? Do you have a dedicated SPED person? So these are some of the factors you should consider on how often you would be able to update information to CalPADS. Then of course you also need to consider local reporting needs. So if we have some seasoned veterans here who were probably in this morning's advanced training, wherein we've been discussing, when to submit SSIDs. So, if you have students who require LPAC testing, initial LPAC testing, we would consider you submitting the data as soon as you can. That way the students can be tested as soon as possible and not wait till after census day and you've missed the boat in terms of collecting EL probably for the student. And then that also goes the same for in the middle of the year for CASP, when probably around springtime when CASP starts. So you have to basically submit all of the information required for CASP testing. And then for direct certification, of course, you want all of your students who are enrolled this year to be directly matched or directly certified to see who qualifies for free lunch. So as soon as you have the information, the better. And that also goes for foster youth matching. How foster youth or even homeless, these are moving students, targets. So it's really hard to keep up with who are your foster youth, who are your homeless students. So as soon as you have that information, submit it to CalPADS. And then assessments, another way would be the assessments, submission timelines and reporting deadlines. So for fall 1, you have, was it December 27? I believe, or 18. I just lost track of that. We have your initial deadline. So for the initial deadline, even though it doesn't matter for SPED students, it matters for P1 calculation. So if those calculations matter, funding mattered for you, then of course you have to consider all of these timelines, especially with fall 1 being dependent on all of this data for funding purposes. And we have here ongoing maintenance. And so it is important that you have to update everything as soon as the information is available, as soon as you have any corrections. That way it would make it easier to select correct SSIDs for transferring students and avoid CCEs, or also to avoid any anomalies, and also to ensure that LAs have access to current data, helping LAs place new students in appropriate programs, which is evident with like MigrantEd, or what other programs do we have, Nate? I just lost track. Foster youth, yeah, those things.
Identifying those students eligible for free and reduced price meal.
Yeah, that's right. So those are programs that that
Kyron forgot the programs, but he is the program guru, so that doesn't bode well for the rest of the training. Time to check out.
Yeah, well, it's lunchtime. I'm still, process. I'm still recovering from lunch. But yeah, those are some of the programs we have, and it's easy. It's better to get those SSIDs in, get those information in to be able to determine who are eligible and report it to CalPads. This is not the time to say it's better late than never, because late means you won't get funding. So,
Yeah.
and then of course it minimizes LA workload during snapshot collection windows, which means what? During when the snapshot collection is turned on October 6th, after Census Day, then of course, if you already have the bulk of your data in, it really helps you in terms of just updating minimal records in CalPads rather than just starting all your files during the month of October. Just because we say that the census day or submission officially starts on October, that doesn't mean you that's when you start. You could start now, put all of the data in, and then just wait for the report to be generated or activated come census day. And then it says here, ensures that the CalPAS ODS is up to date for assessment, state matching, and accountability. So that's basically what I mentioned earlier. The sooner you have the data, the earlier they can be assessed, and you could do state matching, and also you would be able to see if in terms of accountability, in terms of the SPED, you would be able to monitor any changes in the SPED data that you have for students. So Nate, do you want to start with the demo?
So I'm going to begin the demo. Just Kyron had alluded to the submission window or the initial deadline, which is the 17th. You can always find that from the portal. Kyron showed you the system documentation page, but there is the calendar, and that's where I've clicked on now. And so you have your key dates throughout the year at the calendar. This information is also in the CalPads user manual. And so the initial deadline is December 17th, and the close of the amendment window is January 28th. So I just wanted to show you that that information is always there. And then here are the days that we will not be available. These are federal holidays, but what's most important at the bottom is twice a year they have a CalPads information meeting. And we know this date to be October 19th. Unfortunately, it hasn't been updated yet, but sometimes it's updated in advance, and you can see it at the CalPads calendar. And so while I'm sharing my screen, let's go straight into the demo. Of course, I went through online maintenance to the batch file upload screen. And I'm going to begin with an enrollment file. And this is in particular of importance because ownership to edit, change, modify students' data is dependent on their enrollment history. And so you establish ownership of the student's record for the time period in which they're enrolled by submitting the enrollment file. So this begins everything typically in CalPads, especially for Fall 1. Certainly students can enroll after the Fall 1 reporting period in March. You would still have to enroll that student to be able to update or submit records that are relevant. And so I'm selecting the file, right? At this point, you had already extracted these files from your student information system, but you could create a folder and place all your files in the folder. I would encourage that because sometimes there's a discrepancy in what you see in CalPads and what you believe you submitted. Having the original file is great, at least until you decide you can archive that file. And so you can keep track of, you could just verify, if not for your own peace of mind, because, unfortunately there are some issues with CalPads, and there's other times when there's no issue. The issue might be on the user end. And, it's like keeping a receipt, right? I know how much I paid for it. I know what I put in. Here's my evidence, or what have you, right? Your own peace of mind. So I'm taking this file that I've already extracted from my student information system. And so now I'm ready to upload it. Now, We explained in batch file self-paced that there's additional functionality, but you want to make sure that when you're submitting enrollment, those files are posted before the subsequent files are even uploaded, because you have to establish the enrollment. And until that record is posted, it's not in CalPads, right? If you submit it, it goes through the first set of validations, and then it's available to review, but it's not posted. And so everyone has an account associated with an LEA. If you have an admin account, you can select the submitter, or it will default on your name. And always be aware of the dates. If you're doing like a historical check, or if you upload a bunch of files and leave, you can't find those. Just make sure that you upload it from date and upload it through date is within the range you're looking. And then I'm going to click apply filters, and this will show us a list of all the uploads. And again, if you have an admin account, you can see all the uploads submitted by those in your LEA. Because we have state level accounts, we can just see all the files uploaded for your LEA, in addition to those who may not be associated with your LEA, like Kyron and myself. And so you can see that I submitted the file and it's in process. And while it may process quickly, we don't have a lot of time. So I've submitted this file previously. It's the exact same file. And this one's going to result with 20 records and 1 rejected, right? So this is just a summary screen. If you're going to submit a ticket about a question or a file, please include the job ID. You can see this column list. It helps us identify which file. If you say my enrollment file, you can see there's one here, one here. There might be some on page 2 and 3, or program or information. So it helps us find out specifically what you're looking for. So that's one of the good uses from this screen. I'm going to click view. And so you have to drill down to the view submission detail screen. And at this point, this is where the work really begins. We've submitted the file, but those records won't post, right? So it defaults on the view errors and warning screen, and we only have one error. And then you can cycle to the view post records. So the enrollment file is a little bit different from all the other files in that if there are SSIDs or students who do not have SSIDs yet, they don't necessarily error out, because you have to be able to claim SSIDs for students when you don't know them. Either they're new students or they transferred, and for some reason the QM file doesn't have the SSID. And so you can see that wherever there's not an existing SSID, I have a SSID request match status. Basically, CalPads is doing its best to identify the student that doesn't have the SSID with an existing student. And there's 3 different types of match statuses. There's new, right? So this means there was no match. This might be a new student. There's single. So although I didn't know the SSID, there's a single match that I should review before I try to post a SSID. And then there's the possibility of a multiple match. And so that means more than one student matches this student's demographic information. And so those that have a match always have to be reviewed. If you go to the basics of CalPads training, or if you look in the user manual and look under auto post, right? 2 different words. Well, I can do that while I'm here. And so, you can just Google CalPads user manual anytime, or access it through the footer. And it's in the admin section, wouldn't it be?
Yeah. It's in user roles.
Under creating user accounts, we have auto post, and you would have to click it. You see down here when you create the account, there's this thing that says auto post, and then there's an arrow, and you can select the options. And you can either select the option for auto post to automatically post all the single match and all the new matches. It's either or both, okay? And so if you're a large district, you don't have to look at every single match. I imagine if you're enrolling 600 new students and you have 400, 300 kindergartners, you don't want to go through every single or new match and say yes and yes and yes. You want to make sure that your demographic data is accurate and detailed to raise your match status, but you can select auto post for whoever's doing the enrollment into CalPads for your students. You always have to review the multiple matches. You will always have to review the multiple matches. Now, for all these students that we have SSIDs for, and we know their information, they don't have any disposition or match status. These are like concurrent enrollments. These would be the students who have SSIDs and there was an E155 last year, or perhaps they came from a different school and there's a T160, but we have their SSID. We're not trying to identify them or give them a new SSID. And so for those students, you can click post all. You can do it at any time. You can do it every time you submit an enrollment file. You can go to post all. And all of these records that are like update records where there's no match, they're going to post. Okay. Then that's when you start validating and reviewing your match statuses. So we'll go back to page 1. And I'm being very brief and quick because this is in the self-paced and we do have some other file types to describe. So when you're looking at new, again, there is no match. So either I can select new SSID or none of the above because I know this student was in a state preschool program. I think this student has an SSID, should have been reported to CalPAS before. CalPAS didn't recognize it. I can select none. Or if I'm not sure, I can go back to my local system and review to see if Anaheim has a match. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe the student was in a private preschool program, not a state-run program, has never been enrolled in a California public school, therefore has no SSID. Or because preschool students are not required unless they're special education to have SSIDs, perhaps they were in a public program, but just weren't assigned to SSID because that's not required, right? And so those are your options when it's new. You can select a new SSID. You can say none of the above, and so that this record doesn't remain in limbo, or you can leave it in limbo and come back to this file if you've done further research. For single, there's one exact match. It's 100% match. That's what single means. And it tells you 100% right here at the top. And then you go down and look at all the same things, right? You look at the enrollment date. Of course, this is this year's date. That's last year's date. So I can see the student was previously enrolled at Emerson Elementary. That's the school that I have now, right? And so I can see this is the exact same student down to the local SSID because the student was enrolled with my district last year. I just exited them at the end of the year, right? So I don't know why I didn't have the SSID, but I could have, right? And so that's the reason why it's a single exact match. That's when I would want to select, yes, this is the student. And I'll just save this. You have your multiple matches. And so down here we have multiple match, right? And so there's going to always be kids with common names like Christopher Williams or, you know, Michael Johnson, right? You know, there's only so many Kyrens in the world, but there's a million Michael Johnsons. And so those students may often have multiple matches, no matter how accurate or detailed our data is. Michael Johnson Jr. most likely is going to have Michael Johnson Sr. as his dad, and the million Michael Johnson Seniors had 2 million Michael Johnson Juniors, who knows, or whatever. It could be like George Foreman. He named 5 kids after himself. You never know, right? So you have all these matches. You want to go through them. You want to go through them with a fine-tooth comb. Sometimes the information presented to you on this screen isn't enough, right? The birth dates are the same. Perhaps, I mean, if you're at a bigger city, you can't even identify from the place of birth if it's a different student. And that's when you want to look at like demographic information, race, ethnicity, parent information. You know, it's not, unless they're juniors, probably not going to have parents with the same first name, right? And then we can stress the importance of, if you have both parents' names, use both parents' names, right? Because the more detailed the data is about your students, the better we create that student profile, the easier it is to track these students, right? Some of these students are not going to go to one school or 3 different schools for their entire academic career, right? So not too many kids are so lucky that they go to one school for elementary, one school for middle school, and one school for high school. That's usually not how it works. Some of these kids, may go to 12 different schools and, the life of their academic career. So, just want to be detailed so these students can be tracked and their progress is kept. I mean, we know that we're transitioning into the cradle to career. And so the importance on better serving these students and keeping their data, kind of homogeneous in CalPads is very important. And so you just want to be as detailed as you can, especially if you're the one doing the initial enrollment. But in the case of multiple match, you want to be very detailed and look at the different things. Kyron created a term for when you match the wrong student. He calls it hijacking an SSID. And so what you do is, if you claim the wrong SSID, you take ownership. So Kyron's at one school district and he hasn't done his enrollment yet. I jumped the gun. I'm getting ahead. I have all the students that are taking the LCAP I need to get SSIDs for. So I'm proactive. I'm on top of it, but I make the mistake and I hijack SSID. I've taken ownership of his student, and then I have to go through the burden of taking my data off so he can reclaim that SSID once he tells me, hey man, you got the wrong Michael Johnson. The track star's over here running for our school. So, you want to keep that in mind. And like anything, if you do your due diligence early, it pays off in the long run. And so, because we have to do this training a couple more times, I'm going to elect not to post, but I will validate the matches. I've only made one match. Remember, I only selected one student. And so I just want to show you the functionality. It brought us back up here to the top, and we're used to validating the post, right? That's what we do in CalPads. But we're doing nothing if we click post all here. You have to know to scroll back down to the bottom and post the match SSIDs. So this is a little funky post kind of screen, right? Because you have post all for the updates or the students that you have already. Those are students with the SSIDs. You have it up here. If you wanted to do it individually, you can click that and post per school. But any of your matches, 1, 2, all of them, 3, 4, whatever, you have to do the validate and post down here. Okay. And also you need to be aware that if you select post all here, that process is going to perform before you can post again, right? So it's always good to click post all, go through your matches, validate and select, save selected. If you didn't see that, you can, there's an option to save selected. See, I can save selected here. And so as you're going through, in case CalPads has a hiccup, you save that selection, you won't have to do it again, and then you could post. And again, if you got to go through 150 students, maybe you can't sit down and go through all 150 at a time. You can save them and come back to them, or you can post those that you've gotten through, come back to the file. Just know that until that posting process is done, you can't go back and post again. You can select, you can save selected, but that posting function is not available to you. So you've updated your enrollment, you've assigned an SSID, just like online maintenance, your students have their SSIDs. Then you want to go to the extract screen. You can see it here. And there's 2 extracts you need to be aware of. We talk about them in self-paced, also in the user manual, your candidate list. So when you have multiple matches and you can't determine who the student, and you have any matches and you can't determine the student on the spot, you can extract the candidate list and it tells you all your potential matches. Then you can go back, look at the CUME file and kind of try to determine if these students are the matches and get the SSID before you come back to match them in CalPads. That's what the candidate list extract is. The SSID extract, we'll click it actually, show you the functionality. This file can be imported into your student information systems. And so when you claim or obtain an SSID for a new student, you can have those SSIDs and quickly upload them into your information system. So here's submitter, and you'll notice it's per job. If you submit the same file because you have errors and you resolve and correct those errors, you don't necessarily have to post or extract the SSIDs every time. But anytime you post or claim SSIDs, that's when you want to click the job and upload them into your student information system. And it defaults on all. And then you want to name your extracts just so you know, as they're going to be listed here. As you can see, we've extracted a lot of files. You know which ones you've extracted. And if you ever have 0 megabytes in file size, like this one, there's no bytes, that just means there's no data. And because I didn't post any SSIDs for this SSID extract, I don't have anything here. So those are the 2 extract files. So after you've uploaded and posted your student enrollment records, and in that you've claimed your SSIDs, you're going to complete the student's profile, and so you're going to have additional files. And so you can submit the student information, or you can submit them all, right? We all have different methods and procedures in how we do this, but the relationship between the student information, the student English language acquisition, and the student program is null, right? This data does not impact the other in terms of posting and validating. There are going to be certification errors that can trigger, and that's why Kyron suggests, like, if you have EL students identified in student English language acquisition file, they're going to be required to have a language instruction program, a LIP program. So where we used to say submit programs first, it's probably more efficient to do this prior to that. But ultimately, they can be submitted at the same time. And because the file submission process is iterative, you'll probably submit each file type multiple times until you have all your data clean and in CalPads. It's up to you to determine. But for now, I'm just going to be submitting the student information, right? And so at the very minimum, when you submit your information to CalPads, be prepared to submit just not the enrollments, but also the student information, right? And the reason being is you need the demographic information for student matching. TOMS needs demographic information. Enrollment alone does not work. So if you enroll students in CalPads and they're not coming up on TOMS, you probably need to submit the student information records as well. It's not just a matter of enrolling the student. You have to submit that demographic information. Same thing with direct certification, state level matching. How can the state identify which Michael Johnson is which and is eligible for free lunch if you don't tell them the address, the race, ethnicity, the parent's name, right? Or how do you identify a student's foster just on name, right? Because the enrollment record doesn't have too much identifiable information, and it's deliberate. It's the student information record that provides the birth date and all that. And so you can see again that I just processed this file, and just like before, where I told you the enrollment was pre-submitted, so we didn't have to wait. I did that the same with the student information. So we can look at the 6 pass record and 4 records that are going to result now. And so there's a couple areas that we want to talk about before we go into the pass records for this information file. Again, you have your view submission details at the top. We talk about this in the batch file submission training, as well as the self-paced. We have a lot more time. What I want to point out is the file status. It's in review. That means I've clicked it and I looked at it. It starts off for ready for review. Then when you click the file and you look at it one time, you come to the view submission detail screen. It's now in review. So before you submit a record and say, I submitted my file I'm waiting on CalPads. Look at your file status, right? There's if it's posted or if it's post requested, that means you've done something, right? Posted means you're done. You don't have to do anything. It's processing in CalPads or those records are in CalPads. Post requested means you're waiting for CalPads to post. Some partial post means you've posted some of the records. Like if I went and posted in the enrollment file, post all, I posted those updated SSIDs, those updated enrollments, but those new students that I haven't matched yet, that might be the reason why I'm in partial post. Only half the files posted. I have to go back and do work. Same thing with in review. That means CalPads is telling you you need to review. All right. So just the file status is very important. You want to be aware of it. And then you have all these errors here, right? And so if you want to specify a specific error and see the students, you click 4, and all we're going to do is focus on this SINF 007 invalid SSID. I'm going to click now the error description, and that takes me to the CalPads user manual. And it says the student SSID must be valid in CalPads and the ODS. The ODS is the operational data store. It just means it's not in CalPads. ODS means CalPads, basically. Suggested resolution, verify the SSID provided in submission is valid by searching through CalPads. Not all SSIDs, blah, blah, blah. This is old information, okay? So I have to verify that the SSID is valid. So I then go back to CalPads, right? I look at the student. I can see the SSID field, it's blank. Why is it blank? Why is this one blank? San Francisco's blank. What I do know because this is my data, these are all my new students. So I probably really didn't post the enrollment records for these students. So I jumped the gun and submitting my student information. I need to go back to my enrollment file in post, or maybe the file's still processing. Maybe it's in post requested. I clicked the post button, then I submitted my student information file. I did not wait for it to say posted or revision status complete. That file's still processing. So I don't have an SSID yet for these students, which is fine. I know I have to go back, resubmit this file after I get an SSID. I have to update my student information system, assign these students SSIDs, then extract a new file and post it. And so I can see if I go to GER 001, required field missing, one of those is SSID. I go back to the error and it's identifying for the GER 001. The SSID is the field name. You can see here, the field name is missing, required field missing. So all 8 of these errors are triggering for the same reason. I don't have an SSID. And there's an Excel version of the error list if the user manual isn't your cup of tea. And then you can submit a support request ticket if you go to help. Service request. That's basically 911 Chiron. Now for the records that passed, I can post all. And it's okay if my student information system extracts these same records again. I'll just be matching what's in CalPads and I can post that as well. And like I said, it's an iterative process. It's designed for multiple submissions. Typically, that's what's required. And so you can post these, then extract a new student information file, trying to correct those 4 students, which triggered 8 errors. When you submit the next one, hopefully you submit a student information record file with no errors, and then you can move on. So let's look at a past record in detail. And when you're troubleshooting, I always suggest go to record details, compare the fields of validation between this record and the CalPads ODS, or this record here, this image represents your submission because we haven't posted it yet, or this and your student information system to identify the discrepancy. One thing about the error list is those fields validated tell you where to look. So if it says GER 001, I have about 10 fields here. I don't need to look at any other fields. I need to be making comparisons between these fields and the source, which is my student information system, or these fields and the existing record, which is the CalPADS ODS, which is the student's record and online maintenance. And so we've been talking about the new file type for the student information system. And you can see that these fields have been added. I don't want all of them. The mailing address wasn't previously there. I didn't populate anything because the mailing address is the same as a residential address and the record passed. So you don't need to duplicate it. It doesn't need to be populated twice. If the student lives on 35 Cherrywood Lane, that's where the mail goes. That's it. It doesn't require a mailing address to be populated. And it's not so specific. As you can see, this is a fake zip code. It's just looking for 5 digits. Other than that, that's like the semi-big change is we've added a secondary set of address. And I just wanted to highlight those fields. And that's it. You can see that this student doesn't even have parent guardian information. The only thing that's ultimately required is the parent guardian education level. And there is a code if they don't provide the education level for did not submit.
So Nate demonstrated the SCNR and SINF upload. So I'll be in charge with demonstrating the SPRG and SELA. And so as I've hinted earlier, if you guys just want to be efficient in terms of submitting files, don't want to resubmit files all over, I personally would recommend you submit the SELA first, because you know how you need anyway to submit to know who if students who are TBD has to be tested, and also to determine if they're EL or RFEP, IFEP, and so that would dictate their LIP program as well. And so just being efficient, I would suggest submitting the SELA first. However, you could always submit the SPRG first, depending on what is available. Just do know that just in case you sneak in a LIP program that is not appropriate to the student, then of course you would get an error. So let's do the SELA first. So again, we're at file upload, and I type the SELA. I choose the file and choose that, open, and I'll upload the file. And as Nate also mentioned, you could submit both SELA and SPRG at the same time if you want. But I personally would like you to, it's still a long way before the deadline. So submitting all files would basically also stress the system more, considering what it's been doing so far. And so we have the SELA, and since we're in tests, we could then bring up, and we have our SELA in process. So let's just assume that you've submitted your SELA, and it turns out all 24 records got rejected. So let's view the file. You can either click on view or click on the job name. And here you would see all of the errors that triggered because of the rejected records. So more common are your SELA 283. So let's say if for some reason you've accidentally extracted all of your SELA records, for your district or for a specific school, chances are you might get a lot of SELA 283, which is just an ELAS date mismatch, or a SELA 326, which has a ELAS start date already exists for a student. So what does this say? Well, let's click on SELA 283. It's just stating that if an ELAS code being submitted equals ELAS code in the ODS, then the ELAS start date must match. So sometimes, you know how when you extract a file, your system would generate a file with effective dates or status dates equal to your enrollment or equal to the date of extract. And once you upload it to CalPads, it then creates a mismatch of dates. So this is what it's saying. It's just also saying that, hey, why are you still submitting an EO record for a student that already has an EO in CalPads? So that's essentially what this error is stating. So if you have, let's say, a humongous number of SELA 283, I would recommend just ignoring that for now, and just making sure that you know why it's triggering that error. So let's just look at one specific example here for the SELA 283. So we have here Jimmy Jones. So Jimmy Jones has a SELA 283, and you have here the field value being identified that's causing the error. So if you go to the error itself, what is the fields that are being validated is the status code and the start date of that code. So we click on this, and you can see the code, the field value here for the ELAS status date and the EO record. So if you want to investigate why it's causing this, just copy the SSID and compare it to the record in CalPads, because that's what it's validating against. So it's just stating that you're submitting a record that already exists in CalPads. And so to prove that, we just look at the student details and go to student English language acquisition. So true enough, I have here the student as EO with the status date of 8/20/2020. Now in the file that caused the error, I have an EO with a different status date, which is 8/15/2020. So the date mismatch is what causes the error. So essentially, if you've checked that the student has already an EO in CalPads, or if you have 1,000 of these SELA 283, chances are you're just resubmitting those files, those records for students that already has that existing record in CalPads. The next common error here is SELA 285, which is date out of sequence for English language acquisition status code. So if you click on this, it brings up the list of students, and let's copy this SSID, open the record, and we open search for student detail here. So 285 is stating that ELAS code being submitted does not equal TBD and does not equal any ELAS code in the ODS. Then ELAS start date being submitted must be greater than the most recent ELAS start date in the ODS. So essentially, it's just stating that it's out of sequence. You're saying that the student, you're submitting a record of RFEP 8/20 with a date of 8/20/2020. And if we look at this, you have an EO, but your RFEP had a date of 8/20/2020. So this alone, there is a discrepancy in the file. And so if this happens, then there must be an issue. You first have to verify if the student is indeed an RFEP. And then, of course, if they are indeed an RFEP, then there was there was an issue with how the record was misreported in CalPads, or there was a failure of not reporting the sequence in CalPads. So these are just really rare occasions. If that's the case, then I would recommend you just manually add the RFEP here with a correction code of whatever is relevant to EO to RFEP. Okay, so that's a rare issue that might occur, but just the same. And then, of course, we have our GER 5, which has 7 of them. So why are we getting a GER 5? What for those who are veterans, what triggers a GER 5? Because the GER 5 says LA does not have ownership of student enrolled to make the update. That's right. You don't own the student and no SSID. So let's check.
It's a trick question. Everything triggers a GER 5.
Well, let's just make it simple, and let's just base it on the process of that we have today. So GER 5. So you can't submit a SELA record with a status date outside of your ownership, either because you submitted a TBD, or an EL, not EL, an RFEP before the enrollment start date, or you didn't submit the SSID yet in CalPads, and you're just and you're here submitting the RFEP for this year, and you've relinquished ownership because you didn't submit this year's enrollment. So that's just one of the scenarios that would trigger a GER 5. So bottom line here is that you have to first submit your SCNR, have an active enrollment this year, own the rights to be able to submit supporting records to CalPads for the students. Otherwise, you'll get a GER 5 on all different file types, not just SELA, okay? And then what else? Oh, this one. Invalid Adult English Learner Code, the DEL, SELA 524. So these are the codes that, for those new to CalPads, these are the codes that you have to identify a student, regardless if the student is, depending on the home language survey, or if the student transferred from a different school, depending on what was reported to CalPads, then these are the possible statuses that a student can have. So based on the home language survey, student could be English only. It could be, if the student language survey says the student is Spanish speaking at home, then you see in CalPads that there wasn't any SELA record yet for the student, then you will identify them as TBD. That way they can be tested, and based on the test, they could either be an EL or an IFEP based on their fluency. So with that, that would be the records you should be reporting in CalPads in your SELA file that would identify the students. And then there are also exceptions. You have RFEPs. These are for your students who probably are coming back this year, and you failed to report as RFEP last year, then you could still extract the file and upload to CalPads this year. And then, of course, you have your ADEL. These are your students, KN to 12, age 22 and older, who are speaking a foreign language based on the home language survey, but can't be tested anymore because of the age limit on LPAC testing. So in that case, students who outright, if a student is 22-year-old or older, during when you got the home language survey, that student should straight out be ADEL. If not, if let's say the student is 21, you report them as TBD first, have them tested, and then if they turn out 22 later on, then you'll have to report them as ADEL. It could be an IFEP. And then if the IFEP turns out to be, if the student is, it could be a DEL or IFEP, basically. So if the student tested and was IFEP, then you can't change that anymore. The student can be IFEP. But if it's an EL, you have to switch the EL status to an ADEL. Okay, so with that in mind, the error that I was showing you is this one here: invalid adult English learner code ADEL for a student. So let's click on Jimmy Jones. Open the record. So it says here, invalid adult English learner code ADEL for a student. So essentially what I'm saying is that if, let's say, the student's birth date is makes it that the student is below 21 or below 22, you can't submit an ADEL yet. You have to go through TBD and then have that student tested and then be reported eventually as an ADEL if the student is EL. However, if this student, as this is showing, because this is basically like 30 years old, then this student should have not triggered a SELA 524. But because the student is an adult English learner, I guess, again, that's some test that might come up in production just in case this gets transferred. But these are just some of the errors that the SELA would trigger when you submit files to CalPAS. Hopefully this wasn't translated into production. So if you get this, then it possibly could be a defect in production too if the dates are correct. Just in case you guys might encounter this, do know that it could be a possible defect. But if it's 22 and older, you could claim a student as a DEL. So here is just the sequence of the normal SELA status change. So you have your home language survey. So I'm just showing this for the benefit of our new users. You have your language survey. If your home language survey show that the student is 22 and older and they're foreign language speaking at home, then you report them right away as a DEL in your SIS, and your SIS will then extract it and post to CalPAS. Now, if based on the home language survey, the student is English speaking at home, and if based on the, let's say if a student is sign language, and based on the 3 questions, one of those, at least one, show foreign language, then that could be a candidate for TBD. Now, if all 3 questions on the home language survey says English, then they're straight up EO. So, however, there are times when, let's say, a student claimed their EO, and then later on, your teachers would say, hey, this student, can express himself or might require to be tested. Then, if that's the case, you have to submit a TBD to CalPAS, because that's the only way the student can be included in the LPAC testing. So you have an EO, it becomes a TBD, and the TBD should be with a date after this EO status date. So the TBD, and then once they're tested, they could either be an IFEP or EL. And as I've mentioned earlier, eventually for those students who are adult, let's say in the middle of the year, they become 22, come end of year, you may be required to submit a new status for the students and submit an ADEL. Otherwise, you'll get a certification error. Okay, so that's it. And so this is the sequence of events. So the accepted sequence. Now, if let's say you have a IFEP and it becomes an EO or EL, that should be an EO, then you can make corrections online in CalPAS. This is only through online maintenance. You can do that. You can make corrections. Let's bring up one of those students here. So let's say this is, so you have Jimmy Jones. So let's say Jimmy Jones was supposed to be EO instead of EL. So if it's an EL to EO, the only way to make corrections on that is to manually add the information in CalPads. And the only way to do that is making correction codes. So just to point out, if you have an IFEP or EL that has to be an EO, you have to manually add the record in CalPads and use a correction code. To get the valid correction codes, there are valid correction codes that you could use, and you could look at the valid code combinations document. Here are the valid codes for if you want to change an EL, and you can only do this if the code you're correcting has a status date within the same year, okay? And you can only do this once before summative testing. So just filter for the active ones this year. So these are the ones, these are your ELAS correction codes you could use and are valid for this current academic year. So if it's an EL to EO, you add the EO record in CalPads. However, make sure that you have a correction code of either 4, and that also goes the same for IFEP to EO 4, and then if it's EL to IFEP, so you get a point. Just make sure that you have the correction code that is valid for that specific change. So again, if you follow this flow, then you don't need a correction code. However, if you're here and you want to go back to EO, or if you're here and you want to go back to EL or RFEP or IFEP to EL, then those are the ones that need correction codes. And you can only make the corrections manually online in CalPads. Okay, so that's for SELA. And again, your SELA would then be used for initial LPAC testing and for summative testing. Make sure that you have your SENR, SINF, and your SELA for TBD in CalPads. That way, TOMS will pick it up. It requires normally about 2 days for TOMS to acknowledge the student's record in ETS, and then that would put the student in roster for testing. And then later on, once you get the results, TOMS will then push either an IFEP or EL status of that student back to CalPads. You don't have to submit the record to CalPads. TOMS will tell you if a student is EL or IFEP, which in turn would then help you identify if you need a LIP record for a student, which segues to our next file, which is the SPRG. The SPRG is the file that you use to report NSLP, eligibility, migrant ed, gate, all of those information. So here are your programs being collected in Fall 1. So you have your free meal, reduced price meal, gate, migrant ed, TK, homeless, tribal foster youth, and your LIP records, okay? So just a reminder, not all of these LIPs are valid for all statuses. So sometimes you have EO students who might be reported with a LIP, that's fine. However, if you have, let's say, I think it's 305 and 306, there are specific LIP records that is only applicable for EL students, okay? So if you get the SPRG 550, then you might get an error. But there are some, let's say if we have a EO speaker speaking and is exposed to, let's say, Punjabi or Russian, because they're in a school that has, a lot of Russian students, or Sikh or any foreign language, foreign-born students, then or speaking students, then you could also claim them as receiving specific LIP programs. And then, although you don't report it, it's not collected in Fall 1. If you have information on basic targeted or neglected armed forces family member, if you have this information, it doesn't hurt to include these records to CalPads. If you have that, that way you don't have to worry about these records down the road in end of year. And as I've mentioned, if you have homeless students, then report a homeless now before you miss out on reporting them as homeless. And then I just want to emphasize the eligibility dates for NSLP. So this is just a table that's available for you to determine who are included in the LCFF report. What is the LCFF report? This is specifically your 1.17 and of course 1.18 detailed report that lists the students who qualify for the local control funding formula. Okay, so these are any students who are homeless, migrant ed, tribal foster youth, and who are matched as foster youth, active foster youth on census day. These are your students who are who would qualify for who would be included in your LCFF report. So essentially, anyone who has an active program SPRG on census day, which means the start date is equal to or before census day, and that student is enrolled and actively enrolled on census day, they are included on the LCFF report. Now, I'm not sure if you guys are still collecting applications this year. However, if you do, and if you're doing income verification or the NSLP application or alternative income form, any student who submits their application form and meets all of the requirements attached to it on or before October 31st, they are included on the LCFF report, as long as you have a program start date on or before October 31st, okay? And then for direct certification, anyone who is directly certified and actively enrolled on census day would then be included as long as they're directly certified between July 2nd to November 2nd of this current academic year. Okay, so with that, let's just upload the file. So we go back to view submissions and upload another file, okay? So we now pick SPRG. And upload the file to CalPads, okay? So now we go back and we have our file in queue. Fortunately enough, we have a file uploaded yesterday to show you some of the files. So we have here the test SPRG. It has 40 rejected and 2 passed. Okay, so if assuming all of your records passed, you can just click on post all, and that should post the records to CalPads. Now, let's say you want to exclude a school or you want to stop this file from posting. You could do that by going to here. Let's say you mistakenly submitted this file and say, okay, I don't want to submit this file entirely. You can just click on this box here and then exclude all, click on the exclude buttons to exclude the file. Now, if you want to just exclude records within a specific school, then just select the exclude button associated to that school, okay? Now, if you want to submit everything, just click on post all. It will only post records that passed validation, okay? Now, let's look at the errors. Our common error is SPRG 70. So it's just stating that you have overlapping program records, meaning you're submitting data for students who already has an existing record in SPRG record in CalPads, or the dates that you're submitting overlap the one that the student already has in CalPads. So let's look at one here. This SPRG can be validated against the ODS. It could also be validated against another record within the file. And this is what happened to sea green egg rolls over here. So we have here 2 records. So I'm submitting one with a date of 9/7/2021. And then I have another one here for the same SSID of 9/7/2021. It's overlapping. You have 2 records here with the same dates, and so it overlaps each other. So if you can't find it in the ODS, you can compare because it's not overlapping anything in the ODS. Chances are it's overlapping within the same file. Okay, so let's look at one that overlaps within the ODS. We have here 302 for Jambalaya Blue Green, 9/7/2021. Copy that. You open another record here. And so we have here, where was that? 302 with a status date of 9/7/21. You have here a 302 with 8/20/2020. So if you already have this student already in CalPAS, you really don't need to submit one every year. But if you do, just make sure you close the prior year's membership end date before submitting a new one. But if you already have this and the student is just coming back and still getting the same language instruction program, then you don't have to fret about these records. You can just ignore this and just retain this record in CalPADS. Then also you might want to wonder why your SPRG extracted that file with a different date. So you may want to check within your SIS if there were multiple records reported, or if based on your extract, you chose the wrong date. So those are just factors that might trigger an SPRG 70. Another, and then we also have GER 5, again, ownership issue. Now you have invalid SSID. This 4 does not have an SSID yet because guess what? It's dependent on Nate posting his SSID enrollment record in CalPADS. So since he didn't post that,
let's not play the blame game, Kyle.
Hey, the facts show there's no SSID. So, I mean, yeah, that's normally the issue. If let's say you didn't post the record or it's still being posted and you jumped the gun and submitted your SPRG, then you would expect SPRG 7 to trigger, okay? So that's basically the demo for SPRG and SELA. If you want to have specific information for each of those fields that or columns in the batch file, please do look at the Fall 1 data population training. It discusses in detail the requirements for each field, when it's required, what codes to look at, and all of those specific details. Okay.
So let's go ahead and get the wrap up. This is good. Normally it's speed reading. All right, just a summary of today's training. It's very important that you post the enrollment records so that you can gain ownership of those SSIDs. Only after those records are posted can you submit the other file types. Those include the demographic information. The demographic information required for all students. Of course, returning students whose demographic information has not changed do not necessarily need an update. However, all students must have demographic information submitted. If you get to Fall 1 and you missed any students or you omitted this file type, you will certainly trigger a possibly CERT 13s or definitely a CERT 004, which is going to look for race and ethnicity information. But the most important thing is your state level matching, identifying students that are eligible for specific programs like the parent ed level, and the student information goes to socioeconomically disadvantaged students, or identifying students by race and ethnicity for certain reports, make sure these students are receiving adequate service and education, and so on and so forth. All that is coming from your student information. I think your static's back, Kyron. LEAs do not need to update the ELAS for every student. Only those that have incurred a change, EL to RFEP, TBD to EL was automatic, TBD to IFEP is automatic. That's coming for LPAC. So really only your ADEL and RFEP students will be those students who get a change, or students who have not had a status previously reported. And this is based on your primary language survey. So your students are either going to be TBD or EO. Should be fairly simple. Of course, I say that, right? Fairly simple. Initial LPAC results will identify EL and IFEP students. Students over 22 must have an ADEL status rather than EL. Program eligibility is counted on your fall 1, right? So this goes for EL students as well. You try to get them identified so that they can be counted on census day. Of course, exceptions can be made. They can extend the date of eligibility to go to October 30th. But generally, the general rule is for programs, those students must be in the program or identified as eligible to count for eligibility on census day. So just keep that in mind. If you are submitting the data after census day, but they were eligible before, feel free to backdate. And then we didn't get to walk through the SPED and SSRV files. They don't come from your student information system, but they are accessible. If you are the LEA administrator, you can go to your view submission screen and filter for SPED or SSRV files, and you can see the results of the upload that came from your SED system. And so if your SEDS data coordinator is getting an error that they can't resolve, or if that resolution requires information from the student information system, like there's a conflict between your special education program and your enrollment status, you can look at the error that's generated on the view submission screen if you do not have access into your SED system. Here are some suggested milestones. This won't be the last time you see this slide. You probably see it 4 or 5 other times. Generally speaking, now you should be populating your student information systems and submitting your data to CalPADS. That we expect to go on through the month of September and October. Towards the end of October, you should be in position to be reviewing certification errors. So if you're new, every file you submit will have input validation errors, right? To get the data into CalPADS, you have to meet certain criteria. Once your data is in CalPADS, it's compared against each other, right? So like Kyron said, if you identify EL student that after you submitted your programs, those EL students must have LIP programs, language instruction programs. So you have to go back and possibly submit a new program record to tell us what language instruction program you didn't previously report. Likewise, if you have a student that's foreign born, whether they're EL or not, all the foreign born students have to have the initial US school enrollment populated. So depending on the order of sequence, you may have or may not have populated the initial US school enrollment. So that's a couple things to think about. Those certification errors, come back and do a last minute validation. And then in November, we want you to be looking at your reports and comparing them. Now, this is a weird year because of the post redesign. They were expecting a big change, but we didn't get that change. So any other year, they'd be trying to emphasize how important it is to get your reports verified and certified before Thanksgiving. You're not getting that push this year, but in actuality, this is the year that if you're ever going to be able to get your report certified prior to Thanksgiving, this would be it. We have minimal change, and we've had practice, right? They haven't thrown special ed data on us and said, do it faster, right? So the expectations are different. And I mention this because they haven't given up. They're going to try to push the certification deadline up earlier. And so it might be in your best interest to try to certify prior to Thanksgiving. That'll give yourself a time between coming back from Thanksgiving break and December 17th, a couple of weeks to review the reports and confirm or deny the accuracy of your data. It's good practice, right? You have a million other things to do. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then We hope that you're approving your data again around Thanksgiving, and then your SELPA approval by the 17th. So going forward, this training should have prepared you for a Fall 1 reporting certification or Fall 1 advanced, right? And so this could be a refresher. You could be an experienced user and prefer to go to the shorter advanced training that Slyman presents. Or if you're new, you probably need to go to the longer Fall 1 reporting and certification, which starts next Thursday. And so Kyron showed you a lot of the resources. We're not going to revisit that. We do want to point out the different forms to contact the service desk. The web form at the top is the quickest way. You can choose to submit an email to us. It'll get to us. It just takes a little bit longer to respond. And they're queued up and they're dumped all at once. It's periodic transfer from the server, from one server to another. And then the phone number are transcribed. So basically you call in, I need help. I'm calling because it's urgent. Unfortunately, this never reaches us. And then it goes and gets transcribed into an email, which then comes to our service desk. And so all that takes longer. So if you're in 911 mode, still submit a web form. That is definitely the fastest way, unless you got Marshall's personal number. And so we do ask that you provide feedback. It'd be very nice if you comment on the style, right? Having the two different online and batch file presentations to let us know if it's worthwhile. Anyone who's watched the self-paced and gone to the live, if you can provide feedback on the difference or the value of any of it. We want to make sure that we're focused our energy on what serves you best. So we'd like to thank you guys all for your attendance and your patience with us. So we appreciate it, and any feedback you provide us is welcome.